Talking of which, the future of the youngest, we're going to be talking about the future of jobs and the opportunities that are opened up by vocational training. In Spain, 40% of the job offers were for vocational training profiles, and this is going to go up by 65% from here to 2030. We're going to be talking about a report called The Challenges for the Future of Vocational Training in Spain. It has been produced by the Fundación Cotec, the Fundación Bankia, and the Department of Education and Training at the Spanish Employers Association. But first, we have Mr. Liera.
Hola a todos. Como presidente de la Fundación Telefónica, quiero dar las gracias a nuestros aliados que desde hace 4 años colaboran con nosotros de forma muy intensa en estos seminarios, a South Summit y al Instituto de Empresa. En la próxima sesión vamos a hablar de formación profesional, uno de los entornos educativos que van a jugar un papel más relevante en el futuro del sistema productivo y por tanto en la recuperación económica de nuestro país, de la Unión Europea y de todos los países. Y por lo tanto, comprenderéis que estamos muy interesados en
global economies. Hence, we're very interested in learning what the next session is going to bring to improve the digital vocational training, which is key for all countries. Thank you. Thank you, César, for your words. Let me give the floor over to Luis Miguel Olivas, the head of the Employability and Educational Innovation area at Fundación Telefónica. Thank you. Thank you, Julia. Welcome to our home, the Fundación Telefónica. I would like to begin by extending my warmest welcome to those of you joining from Latin America and many other countries. I hope this panel will be enjoyable for one and all. It is a pleasure for me to chair this panel on vocational training, which is often disregarded, although it is being discussed globally, and as a society we need to address vocational training. The president is saying it's key for the productive development not only of Spain but other countries. I would like to begin by very especially greeting all of you, and I would also like to say that my thoughts go out to those of you who've had health issues and difficulties during the pandemic. So we are undergoing a revolution, as our president, as has mentioned, has changed the productive sectors and education. Education has changed forever, and I have some figures that I would like to share with you. But before I do this, I would like to tell you a story that happened only 10 minutes ago. I spoke to Gonzalo, who's a student. He's 14 years old, and he said something that is going to open up a discussion here. He said, "Oh, so now you're going to talk about education? Wow, how boring! In 100 years, it's barely changed. Cars, computers, cell phones have changed, but in education, we still have our same desks, and it's boring for me and my friends." Okay, well, we'll see. We'll see what's going on, and we are going to look at some concerning figures, because when it comes to vocational training, only 12% of students go on to vocational training. In the EU, this is more like 29%. Also, almost 40% of job offers require vocational training profiles, and this is going to rise. The We've heard from the government that this is going to go up to 65% of the demand of these profiles. And with this, the Fundación Caixabank, Dualiza, Fundación Cotec, and our brothers in arms, the CEOE, the Spanish Employers Association, decided that we had to open up a discussion, and we've produced a report that you can download at the Telefónica Foundation or Cotec, and the rest of our foundations, which portrays the current situation. And I will now introduce our panelists. We have three good friends, great professionals. Ainara Zubillaga, she's the director of education and training at the Fundación Cotec. Thank you for being here. Juan Carlos Lauder, who is director general at Fundación Dualiza, many years working on vocational training. Welcome. Juan Carlos Tejeda, manager of the education and training department at the Spanish Employers Association. So, Ainara, tell us a little bit the processes that you've witnessed and conclusions you've drawn. Well, indeed, as Luismi has explained, this project arises from workforce, because we knew that vocational training was important in the education system, and it's a lever for transformation and digitalization in Spain. So we decided to address some of the challenges this transformation process faced, focusing on innovation as an axis, because we promote this at Cotec Foundation. So what we did was to create two working groups, so working parallelly, one with Cotec trustees led by Caixabank, and we had companies and other education stakeholders, and we want to learn about the different spaces where agents, players were involved in vocational training, because there's a convergence very clearly when it comes to vocational training, and we have the productive fabric, and all this is intertwined. And at the same time, led by a great ally at Fundación Telefónica and Fundación Telefónica, which is Escuela 21, where there were 21 vocational training teachers who were working on specific proposals for schools, focusing very much on an update of skills, the renovation of curricula, and professional career development. So we're going to see that this is something that the report tackles, and this was done with innovation laboratories, whereby we all got together, broke into groups. We, of course, collaborated very much virtually too, but we built and shared, and we put together this document that I present to you here. The summary would be this infographics with 12 challenges, proposals for the future of vocational training in Spain. I'm not going to go into the details of the 12 proposals, but I would like to convey that these are recommendations for four large stakeholders in the building of the vocational training system. On the one hand, education administration, there's a need to have education policies and also employment policies, labor policies, social policies. Then we have digitalization, which is a constant across all groups as a cross-cutting axis. And then there's a need to open own spaces that takes into account the inherent features of vocational training as a phase in education. has similarities but differences with other cycles. Then the recommendations for companies, we focused on SMEs, and I think that we're going to discuss this because they find more difficulties than larger companies to undertake in this endeavors, but they account for a very large percentage of our productive fabric in Spain. Open up dialogue spaces with all the stakeholders was important, but we wanted to go beyond talking. We wanted to collect information, to create systems, and to deliver a proposal that could be deep. Then companies need to be involved in vocational training, and this is done thanks to dual training. So this was important to study, to see how companies can not only be a place to work in, but as a place to study and learn in. Then we also focused on faculty members, teachers, and we made the most of the feedback we got from the group of teachers. They demanded new competencies, not only for teachers, but also for students, which are sometimes a bit disregarded in this respect. Often they are at the heart of what we do, but we tend not to include them when making decisions. This we must admit. Then curriculum flexibility was important. This is especially important, and we need an agile regulation framework to have new degrees. This needs to adapt to the ever-changing labor market, and this sometimes clashes with a slow administration. And finally, we need a coordination between tutors of the practical classes and academic tutors. And then the final block of recommendations are for other stakeholders. And there was a specific place for vocational training. It's used as a lever to thrust vocational training, the relationship of vocational training and universities. I am aware that the new laws that are going to be passed that on universities and vocational training tackle these strategies and lines of actions to bring together two worlds that are closer than meets the eye, but that have turned their backs to each other. So this is true that third cycles are also the tertiary studies, and this is important, should happen in universities too. And then we need to take into account that we have an old-fashioned view of what the vocational training is. We've linked them to very industrial factory jobs. This is the image portrayed, far away from the digitalization process that is sought to be fostered in these tertiary studies. And as a woman, I would also like to underscore how important it is for women to be involved in vocational training. We should be there not only in careers that have to do with caregiving or healthcare professions. So this public image that we are conveying in vocational training is important, because this has an impact on families and in the decisions that boys and girls make. Well, thank you very much, Ainara. Okay, so we're going to shake this, and I would like to ask Juan Carlos Lauder at your foundation, Caixabank Dualiza. You've been working for years on vocational training. You started with dual vocational training. And Ainara has mentioned two very critical points. So students at the center of everything we do, as the president mentioned, and the image of vocational training. Question: what are the barriers that hinder vocational training? What should we tell Gonzalo's father so that they don't have a negative bias or negative idea of what vocational training is? Well, the main hindrance is a lack of knowledge. There's a biased image that has to do with past stereotypes. When you think vocational training, you think somebody with a blue collar and and dirty with grease, but now we're looking at white-collar workers with a tablet in their hand. So we need to let people know also the potential of vocational training. You, I think, hit the head in the nail. You talked about the studies, and we see that there is a huge demand of vocational training. There's more demand of people with a background in vocational training than with university studies. So vocational training leads to employability. It allows you to have a professional and vital project, so you can really shape your life around a profession that will allow you to meet your needs, the needs that we all have, apart from revenue. But I think that we need to connect vocational training not only with jobs. We're training people, and we need to bear in mind that the latter needs to be seen as an itinerary. So you can study vocational training today, but that doesn't mean that once you've finished your studies, you stop learning. I think that you're probably going to have to learn throughout your whole life. It's clear that vocational training is going to be permanent, ongoing. There's got to be lifelong learning, and this is true for vocational training because the latter can meet many demands. So vocational training is an itinerary to reach goals that might end in university. And Ainara, you were saying this, we need to see how to bridge vocational training and college, and the other way around too, because some people study in university an undergraduate degree, but they want to do something that is more practical, that is closer to being hands-on, and maybe they end up studying vocational training. Some people take this path, but backwards, and it's important to understand the employability figures that this allows you to make a living, and it's an itinerary that opens doors rather than closing doors. You can study with different degrees, and you can start, for example, with a second cycle and move on to third cycle, or do vocational training. Well, at Enlighted, we're going to have a panel on vocational training with a Latin American edge to this, and we were discussing with different panels whom you'll hear soon. They tend to say that the patterns are quite similar, so they don't vary that much with the environment. In Spain, let's look at the blogs that you mentioned in this report. When it comes to administration, we talk a lot about digitalization, and that the administrations need to do more. So we want to applaud the Ministry of Education and vocational training in their attempt to modernize universities and vocational training. Juan Carlos, I have a question for you, because this plan includes what teachers identified even before this plan, as Ainara mentioned. My question to you is, what should be, or what should be the main focus authority? What should the government of Spain focus on to begin with?
So I think the modernization plan should be seen as a part of a group, otherwise it wouldn't make sense. It's part of a total, also linked to the bill of the vocational training bill. And for me, it's really important, digitization, when it's linked to entrepreneurship and innovation. So Gonzalo will hate us, but it's about teaching differently. Teaching like 50 years ago, well, there are no further punishment in class as beforehand, but the way we teach is exactly the same. So we're talking about digitalization, innovation, and entrepreneurship, so that we can teach differently, and also working on those skills which are not just technical knowledge, which are cross-cutting. We're talking about critical thinking, teamwork, adaptation, capability. It's an environment of learning throughout life. And it's important that this is done in centers, but with teachers, and teachers teach students to be driving engines for innovation. And when we talk about innovation and entrepreneurship, we see them as self-employed, but not necessarily. You can be part of a company and you can have this entrepreneur feeling. So if you stand still, your professional career will too. So they should come hand in hand with the needed resources so that this can be done in all centers, so there's a real equality in opportunities. So when we're talking about companies, I'd like to ask Juan Carlos Tejeda, you are helping governments and regions in Spain in channeling all these funds that should be coming at some point. So what's the latest on this topic? Will Spain be able to channel all these resources? Well, first, thank you for the invitation. I am surprised at this huge production that you have here at Enlighted. Thank you for doing this so brilliantly. And the question you ask is very difficult. To give you an idea, most companies, 99%, only talk to public administration to pay taxes. And when we talk about funds, we need to get closer the businesses to the public administration managing these funds. And we are trying to start different initiatives. We started with an office for European projects so that we can develop different projects in different areas, obviously, including education. And then we've also launched COE for Europe platform, where we are collecting all the calls and tenders in different areas so you can access those funds. And thirdly, we have set up a task force to monitor where these funds are used. So we will check on the governance. This is quite difficult. We're talking about the central, the regional administrations. We're talking about 55% going for the Spanish regions. Then we'll have to follow up on the quantitative ratios, the calls, the tenders, and the good practices so that we can assess them and then assess the central government and European institutions. And also, how does this work? Well, this seems to be a bottleneck in the relationship between the administrations, the central one in Spain and the regional ones in Spain. So we need to unlock this knot, as there is no agility, and we need to be reactive, agile. We have to follow a series of timelines, and this should be a national priority to meet all the deadlines to ensure that these funds make it to Spain and they are used properly, and they are used for the modernization plan, which is it's very high up on the Spanish agenda. That's millions of euros so that we modernize the vocational training education in Spain. And that's what we're doing in our association, our organization. Well, excellent. Thank you for your congratulations. But, well, we have a whole team working behind the lines, and kudos to them. So let's get to the point. Well, this might be very much PC, but you know very well the business sector. Are companies ready? So we don't say that we are hiring university degree students or professionals and we go for vocational training, and also SMEs, which is one of the key driving forces in our countries. Are SMEs ready to hire these vocational training profiles? I'll try to be as PC as possible. Are businesses ready? Well, they don't have an option. They must be. According to the latest reports and data, in Spain, in 2025, that's around the corner, 49% or 50% of jobs required by companies should be of medium level, and this means vocational training. So we're talking about higher education, but then a very low education. So young people without a proper qualification, it will be very hard for you to access the job market. So regarding your questions, are company ready? Well, we see that they are. In fact, the data that we have tell us that in 2020, there were 2 million university degree profiles hired against 3 million profiles coming from vocational training. On that basis, we see more young people enrolling in vocational training than in the higher education previously to university. It's a close tie between the university and the vocational training. This is becoming a reality that is here to stay. As for SMEs, well, it's taken them a while as they don't have a budget for training, they don't have training departments, and their professional profiles must be very similar. So that's a huge challenge, to bring them together, bring them closer to the vocational training world. And then we have a dual training program. Is a law, a bill being discussed in Parliament so that SMEs can use this dual vocational training. Let's hope, fingers crossed, it will be difficult, but let's hope that all together we can ensure that dual or vocational training gets closer to SMEs and self-employed to vocational training. Okay, before we move on to the next part, I don't know if you'd like to add something on this topic. This can be politically correct or not. And then one way we can talk about Gonzalo's father, if not. Anyway, I think this change is happening, but very often people go for the highest profile, that is the university degree profile, when the job actually requires skills that are closer to vocational training skills, due to the lack of knowledge of the HR departments, of the possibilities brought up by the vocational training. Sometimes they don't know that there is a vocational training degree meeting their needs perfectly. This happens with IT. Very often we hear that we need a great deal of computer programmers and engineers, but we don't just need one programmer and 50 engineers, rather the opposite. So these changes, and there's still some reluctance. Maybe the pattern followed by the company to hire is all about the degree, not so much the profile. So we need to keep progressing. In fact, there are European tools to break this, to improve this. And we see that the relation is different in Europe. We see that in Spain we always tend to focus on university, and also for the company, well, binding together the job requirement and the profile needed is much better than just if we are based on basically a university degree title. Also, we need to review the algorithms of the recruitment processes. There is a gender bias, but also there's a bias for higher education profiles. It's machines themselves that they choose the higher education profiles to the detriment of vocational training profiles. This includes not only HR, but also the algorithms. So at the beginning, we were talking about the importance of female talents. Now you're talking about biases very well. This week, two major organizations held an important event working on those issues, biases, decision-making in our companies, but also in those writing the algorithms. And this is a question that I like to ask you. What do we need to do? What's our responsibility to incite those vocations so that female students get closer to technology and to maybe directive managing positions in the big companies? Ainara, that's one for you. I always tend to say that the focus is placed on ourselves, and it's us who should get closer to technology, and not the other way around. We need to make a huge effort. So we need to change the discourse that is underlying to technology. Why is technology not attractive to us? Because for us, it seems it is a gadget. But we are looking for something else. For example, we need to think that when you enter a hospital, there's a great deal of medicine, of course, but also a great deal of engineering. And that's where we click. So we need to get closer to technology, but most importantly, the technology model needs to change. So if we change also the education model, then Gonzalo and his friends will come willingly to vocational training studies. I don't know if you would like to add something, but also picking up on what you said before regarding the official degrees and the formula used by companies in their recruitment processes. From your foundation, you look for innovation models, disruptive models, learning models. And we see that models are non-standard, not anymore. So if we're talking about a learning model like the one from A42, where people are learning to learn and working with colleagues, and which is challenge-based, game-based, gamification-based. So those students say, well, I was kicked out of the system because the system was boring and now I found a motivation here. So Ainara, these models, how do they live together with the other models? We're talking about this A42 model with 100% job market insertion. How do they live together with the standard model? And what about the hiring of companies? Well, they should live together as complements. The problem is that they are pitched and sold as oppositional, and that's where problems start. So university is one thing. And then we could talk about the needs of renewal of university, which are there, but the university is what it is. And the good thing is that it's linked to building knowledge that is rigorous and serious, and that is based on scientific research. They do this very well. But then there are other models doing other things, complementing things provided by university, but where university falls short. So let's ensure that they converge. So the moment that is either or, well, maybe it's not either or. You can start from vocational training and then move on to university, or the other way around. So let's not pitch things as either or. When it happens, there is always somebody who feels threatened. So we need collaboration, and this collaboration is lost here. So both can live together perfectly, as there is a demand for education, for training, continuous learning, and it's huge, and increasing in the next few decades. So there's room for everyone in all different modalities and catering for different needs. The key is to integrate these disruptive technologies, which are successful when it comes to recruitment, retainment of students, A42. The dropout rate is not important when we talk about the A42. And, well, university vocational training, the dropout rate is quite high. That's a success. So these successful stories should be integrated into the vocational training in the university and the primary and secondary education. If this works and attracts students, then let's try and integrate these methodologies. So I think projects like 42 show that this more official training, education, is not meeting the needs of the production center. Having a university degree is not the objective, it's a medium. So when students realize that the degree itself is not the objective is to learn, to access the job market, that's when they when they go for the 42 initiative. So this shows that we need to rethink our university approach, vocational training approach, and that it shouldn't be either or. Okay, we are leaving for last the teaching part, which is the driving engine for change. Juan Carlos said something really important. The high dropout rates when we talk about vocational training is one of the main concerns of the corresponding ministry in Spain. How can we reduce this dropout rate that is 3 times higher than in primary education, than in secondary education rather? So, and your organization, you're working on this maybe. It's all about the previous guidance, orientation. Of course, it's one of the keys, not just the only one, but there is no vocational guidance or orientation. But basically, it's like, okay, if you don't have good grades, you go for vocational training. If you have good grades, then you go to university. Unfortunately, that is the case in most cases. Also, orientation resources are scarce. So that is something really important in the new law. So I think we need to work with counselors to recognize what the vocational training is and what dual vocational training is, but we need to work with counselors, but also with the whole teaching staff. The best counselor is a student's teacher. That's people they see every day, as this is a continuous task. As for orientation, well, it is key, but it is not just the only factor. We see the huge demand for middle education enrollment, and the needs were not met. And then this meant that students had to go for the second or third option. And I remember when I went to university, you had to include 5 options. But obviously, if I'm chosen for the 5th option, then I would have hesitated. So if you have different degrees and then you add administration, but you're not interested in administration really, and it's quite likely that you won't like it. Okay, we have 5 more minutes. We are approaching the end, and now let's talk about the teaching staff. So, Ainara, you released during the lockdown a report stating that there was a clear lack of digital skills in teaching. And then we've spoken about the digital skill sets for teaching staff in theory, but many teachers say that they are fed up with so much training. How do we make more professional this profile? That's my two-pronged question. I think they are fed up with the type of training they are receiving. So the teaching career development path that needs to be overhauled very quickly. As a teacher, the training they need is not about going to a teaching center where a so-called specialist goes there and tells them about new teaching methodologies for the classroom, which has nothing to do, which is totally alien to their centers, their families, their IT rooms. So I think there are other modalities that we've experienced in Ecotech with School First, with teaching labs, group teaching at different stages, different centers, different regions, with different legal regulations and working in a collaborative way. Well, this is more interesting. What, for example, other teachers from a different center might tell you that what I might tell you, and this is not structured or recognized in the system. And then also they receive training that is not part of a development of their professional career. So that is why they feel that they are not growing professionally, and this needs to be reviewed and overhauled. And when we talk about vocational training, it's even more complex, as teachers are struggling on two different areas, the educational world and the productive world, and it's about creating synergies, allowing them to cross from one world to another. And well, if you're talking about primary education, this is not needed, as they are basically school-based. So in our report, we see some specific traits. And when we're talking about developing new initiatives, projects for vocational training, well, these should be included so that diversity is offered.
Okay, so I'd like to ask you to answer in a tweet format because we're approaching the end. Alfredo Hernando, I'm sure you're watching, one of the most innovative teachers in Spain, and you've helped us with this report. I'd like to thank you for participating in this panel. But final message for different stakeholders, Ainara. I'd like to ask you two main messages, one for primary, one for students. AI or emotional intelligence in a tweet formal. I'd say AI at the service of people who are emotions. Thank you, Ainara. Juan Carlos Tejeda, to those companies watching, your final takeaway message so that they are committed with hiring these profiles. Only companies are competitive with competent teams, and this competence is attained by vocational training. It's more immediate, more real. It is closer to the profession. It's just a bargain. Juan Carlos Lauder, your message to your teachers so that they undertaken this endeavor of technological change. Well, teachers are eager to join this adventure. We've seen this in our report. They need to look for places to meet in our collaboration with vocational training centers and with our project Formación. We are trying to encourage sharing experiences. Many new things are happening, many disruptive things are happening in vocational training, but you need to know they exist and see how you can adapt them to your schools. Well, thank you, Juan Carlos. Okay, Ainara. This is out of script. To Gonzalez's friends, to Gonzalo, those who are not motivated to go to class many days, what can you say? Should they be optimistic with the educational changes? I think so. I think there's advancement, that the system is being changed, and these movements are starting from schools, and we're trying to move away from innovative teachers that has very little impact, and we're looking at projects and schools who want to do things differently, and that generates change. Well, okay, thank you. I'm not going to summarize this panel. You can download it, and like goes on.